Hello, everyone. Welcome to our podcast. Most economic podcasts focus on doing interviews with academics. But in this podcast, I turn the spotlight on the students and ask them about the methods and approaches they use to learn economics and do economic research on their own. Now, the aim of this podcast is to encourage other students to reflect on the methods and approaches they use to learn economics and more practically prepare themselves for their assessment. Now, in this podcast, I'm focusing specifically on one of my undergraduate modules, economic history. And I would like to focus on the ways and approaches that the students use to learn about this module and prepare themselves for the assessment. And for that, I am doing interviews with 3 of the students who did this module last year, that is 2019-2020. And the 3 students are Paul, Hester, and Xingdi. So I'm going to start my questions about the first assignment. So this course overall had 2 assignments. One was the essay question and the other one was the final coursework. Let me start with the essay questions. I gave the students 2 questions to choose from, and they had to write a 2,000-word essay on that topic. And now I would like to ask Paul about that assignment. So hi, Paul. How are you?
Hi, I'm great. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. So first question, how did you research for your essay topic?
So I think, first of all, the most important thing is to know what you're looking for. And so the first step that I know I personally took and I think is important is to actually understand the question and understand the way you're going to tackle it. So even before getting into researching about papers or methods or arguments that you want to introduce in your essay, you need to understand what you're looking for. So understanding the question is the most important thing. And once you have done that, the thing that I did was use the readings that you provided to us at the beginning as a gateway. So realizing what is included in these readings and what is not, that could help answer the question or not. And from that point, realizing what I maybe needed to look forward and what I needed to look into that was not included.
Very good. How about you, Xingdi?
Well, I also, first of all, I tried to make myself understand the questions, and I just went through the lecture notes and also the weekly readings to refresh my memory around these 2 topics. And then I also use Google Scholar and UCL EconLit to research and read around these 2 topics, and then I pick one topic that I think I'm more comfortable to deal with that. And then I just list some possible arguments and supporting evidence on this topic.
Now, the second question, as part of this assignment, the students first prepare a plan and they submit a provisional plan of their essays. I'll go through their plan and give a feedback on them, whether the plan is working fine or how they can improve that. Now, one of the important bits for students is that what do they make out of this feedback? How do they reflect on it? So, Paul, how did you reflect on the feedback that I gave you on your essay plan?
So the comments that you made for mine was that there was too much inside. And I think that's something that happens a lot with economic students because we want to include too much in our essays. So I made the effort of taking time, just looking at my own notes and deciding what were the most important things that truly answer the question and what were the rest of the things that were interesting but were not actually a response to the question. So I took some time on that, and then I assessed the level of quality of the evidence that I could cite for my argument as well. And so on base of these 2 things, I tried to decide what I had to include and what I had not to include. And then I started really working on my essay. So I think it's a matter of understanding what the feedback is, because that's important as well, and taking steps to truly shift the way you might approach the question so that it truly fits what you're asked to do.
Good. Hester?
So my original essay plan focused on Alan's argument and sort of had that as the main argument. And you advised me to sort of go beyond that and find criticisms of his argument, and that the data had been criticized by lots of different economists. So I focused more on the criticisms than the argument that we had in the notes. So that's why I started my research there.
Very good. Xingdi?
One of my feedback was about I didn't mention why I choose Japan as my country, but not other countries else. So I actually added a bit in my essay afterwards. And also one of my feedback was about my one of my policies fund is not actually a policy, is more like a political institution. So we also had a discussion on it, and I provide some other ideas of the policies I'm going to choose, and I just substitute it by a more suitable one.
Very good. So I gathered two important things from your comments. The first one was most of the time is to get the focus of the essay right. That's the most difficult bit, because you research, you get very immerse yourself in a topic, and now you want to cover a lot. The main task is to try to really narrow down the focus. And the second one, as Xingdi mentioned, is that sometimes you choose a country to write an essay on, because the essay question wants you to pick a country and analyze it. You always have to justify your country choice, as you mentioned. Very good. Let me go to my next questions. So we started with how did you understand the question? How did you research? Now we're slowly getting into writing your essay. Paul, how many essay drafts did you produce?
So the way I personally like to work is to do a really good plan, and start working on the plan so I can expand it into something that looks like an essay in the form of bullet points. So that's a draft, but not a typical form of draft. And when I have that extensive draft written, and when I'm sure of what I'm going to do, then I start properly writing the essay. So I would say that I spent even more time drafting, as you would say, than actually writing the essay, so that the only thing left for me to do at the end was actually writing it in a way that was academic, but there was only form, not content. So I produced several drafts for every single one of my different parts for the essay, and once everything was extendedly finished, then I started actually writing it with beautiful words.
Okay, very good. So you actually spend most of your time drafting the plan itself, the plan of the structure of the argument.
Yes.
Very good. How about you, Hester?
So I had probably about a dozen drafts, probably more. Might have deleted some to make up room on my hard drive. I start with the bullet point method, like Pol, and sort of having a very rough plan. And then once I've got to the point where it's actually looking like academic writing, every time I start a new draft, I start it in a separate Word doc so that I have the previous draft saved. And it's good for a backup in case you lose stuff, but it also helps me know where I've sort of been going. And if I get to a point where I think I've gone in the wrong direction, made a mistake, I can go back and see my earlier writing and figure out what, different types of organization. So that if I rewrite something and decide I don't like it, I can go back to an earlier version. Yeah.
Very good, very good. Xingdi?
Oh, well, actually, I think I did not save as a separate document each time. So I actually produce a plan at first, and when I finish each paragraph, I sometimes edit each paragraph. And then when I finish the whole essay, I take a full look of the whole essay, and then I edit it again.
So basically, it was one document for you, going back and forth, back and forth.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. 3 different approaches. So the next question, which is very, very, very important, and it's about referencing in the essay. Usually, your students produce very good essays, but it's not referenced properly. The citations, all those little things that matter a lot. So, Paul, how did you tackle referencing in your essay?
So I think, first of all, you need to know how to reference, and this applies not only to your module, but in general. You need to be sure before trying to reference it first to know what you're asked to do, because that's really important. What I do and what I did for your essay, and I do every single time, is that I use this website, which is called MyBib, but there's plenty of them that work in the same way. And every single time I find an article or an academic piece of writing that I like, I include it into different folders that I have, so that I keep a list of everything that I have looked at. And once I have my rough plan and I know what I'm going to write and I know precisely which documents I'm going to use, I do a different one. And there I include the precise one that I'm going to use. But I think it's also important to keep the reference list one stage before, as I said. So have two different ones. One of the one that you're sure you're going to use, and one that includes all of the readings that you did, which you might not include, because sometimes I know I used for your essay some of the readings that I did for some other modules before. And it's always good and important to have a list of the things that you read that you think are important.
So you have a reference bank?
Yes, I do have. I didn't explain properly, but yes, essentially, I have a reference bank.
Is it on a software? Or just
yes, so it's a website in which you need to create an account. This is going to sound like an advertisement, but it's called MyBib, so bib as bibliography.com. And there you create an account, and you can create different documents and folders. And they have really good tools which help you reference using certain formats, but you can classify and do different folders and organize it the way you want.
Hester?
So I always use Harvard referencing because UCL has very clear library guides on it that are very helpful. But whilst I'm writing the essay, as I go along, I leave it till the end to sort of properly format the sources, but I keep track. Usually I have a physical copy in a notebook. As I do my research, I will write down the sources and the sort of the facts where they come. So I know that every bit of information I'm using, I know where it's come from. And as I write my drafts, I include the in-text citations, but not always necessarily correct. I'll use something that reminds me where it comes from. So there, can't think of a good example now, but some papers that I will have like sort of short code for. So when it comes to the end, I can look through my draft and I know where all of the sources are from, and then I properly write out the references.
If you want to simplify your method to us, what would that be?
So keep a note of everything you've read. If you've bookmarked the sites or you have a Word doc full of the links or whatever, just make sure you mark down everything you've read. And then whilst you write, make notes in your text where you've used a source so that you know where each bit of information is coming from. And then at the end, go through and format it properly.
Something that comes from both of your reflections is that, there's a pre-production stage. Once you're just reading your articles, collect the references, collect the notes, you will get to use them later on. Xingdi?
I also use Harvard referencing system, and I actually use the reference function in Word. So I can actually enter the details of my readings in Word, and the reference can be generated automatically. So I also read around this topic and enter the readings I think it is useful for my essay first, and then while I'm writing my essay, I just select from my reference bank using Word.
So we talked about researching the essay, writing the essay, and the final stage is the proofreading. How many times did you proofread your essay? I start with Xingdi.
Yeah, I actually proofread my essay. When I finish each paragraph, I proofread my paragraph, and then for several times. And then when I finish my whole essay, I proofread it again, maybe this time for around like more than 5 times.
Paul?
So I think I do a bit like Xingdi. Every single time I finish a subpart or a part, I reread it. When I finish my essay again, I proofread it. And then usually, since I take the time to finish a bit before the submission date, I let the essay rest a bit so I can reread it with a fresh point of view and notice things that maybe I didn't notice before. So I do like Xingdi, but I think I try to reread it with a fresh point of view, letting it rest a few days.
I can pick 2 things from here. First is this quality control approach. Every small bit you write, you go back and check the quality. And then once you have the whole thing together, you reread the whole thing as one unit, because it really helps you to see whether the flow of arguments are working or not, right? If you read the whole thing in together as one piece. How about you, Hester?
So I have many drafts in which I'm sort of rewriting and improving and often getting it in below the word count. But I have a few tricks that I use specifically to spot typos or errors of that sort. When you've been looking at it so much, you sort of never want to see it again. I will change the font color, the font size, things like that, because if you sort of rearrange it, it looks like a new bit of text and it's easier to see mistakes like that. And I have found a site that sort of reads your words out to you. And I find that quite helpful for spotting mistakes in terms of sort of repeated lines or sort of errors that if the computer can't pick up on it, then there's probably a mistake in there.
And what's the site called?
It's called Natural Reader, I think. I also use it for learning my notes. It's very handy.
By the way, one method that I use, I don't know whether I'm curious to know whether you use or not, I really increase the font size just to spot the typos. Do any of you use that? No?
Yeah, I'll do any change in the font, bigger, different type of font, different colors, highlighting stuff that will just make it look different to trick my brain into thinking I'm looking at something else.
Very good. Very clever. Now, the last question on the essay bit. Now, during the tutorials, I talk about how to plan your essay, how to write your essay, and how to proofread your essay. I give a lot of hints to students. And now I would like to know which of those hints did you find useful in the whole process of your essay writing? I'll start with Xingdi.
I think the most useful hint I find is about how do you like structure an argument. You tell us to, for an argument is typically followed by an economic analysis or case study. So it helped me to get an idea of how to extend my arguments. And also I find that the hint to use subheadings and to split my essay into different sections are also very useful because it can just illustrate my argument more clear.
So breaking down to sections, what was the first one?
To structure an argument.
Okay. Paul?
I think for me it was your comments about restricting ourselves to the question, because once again, it's what it applies. I struggle the most with, not divagating. And then also you really emphasize the importance of being aware of not establishing causal relationships when there are not, and the difference between an argument or a source of something being sufficient, being necessary, and the different ways that we could present the arguments. So we should not be tricked into assuming something is causal, something is sufficient or necessary. So I think that was something that I had to focus on, and your comments were really helpful with that aspect.
So getting the focus right, be careful about the causality, whether is a sufficient factor, necessary factor, or accelerating factor. Anything else, Paul?
I think you also, when we were doing essay plannings and there was not much evidence, or the evidence wasn't of high quality, you mentioned it. So I think your hints also on looking for good evidence that we could actually cite and use was also important as well. You need evidence for an essay.
Hester?
So the bit I found specifically helpful was when we sort of discussed what was necessary in an essay and what made a good introduction. Because knowing how to set out the introduction, with you said we should have the motivation behind why you're answering the question, and the sort of roadmap of the essay of sort of what your arguments are, where you're going to sort of go. When you know how to set out a good introduction, obviously makes a good essay, makes it clear to who's reading it. But it was also helpful to me when planning essays, because now I will start by writing a good introduction, and then I know where I want to go for the rest of the essay. So the argument is clear to me, the writer, as well as to the reader.
So I gather the main added value was to help you get the introduction right.
Yeah.
Correct. Okay. We're done with the first part of our podcast, which dealt with the essay assignments. And now I would like to talk about the second part, which is about